Okay, so in order to understand medieval philosophy, I think we need to first begin to understand the medieval world and the rise of the medieval world. So I'd like to take this, make a short lecture on the origin of the medieval world in Europe. So we commonly call the medieval world the Middle Ages. So why do we call it the Middle Ages? Middle means in between two things. Well, the term Middle Ages comes from the Latin medium aeverum, and this expression was coined by the Renaissance humanists who believed that they were involved in this process of a rebirth, of a reawakening of the great achievement of the ancient world, namely ancient Greek civilization and all that came with that. We looked at the philosophy of that, but everything else that came with this great achievement of the Greeks. And after the Greeks, the Romans. So that's a great achievement. And when the Renaissance humanists looked back at history, they thought, oh my God, in between us and this ancient world, there was this period which was completely different from the ancient world and from what's happening right now. It's in between us and the ancient world. And they spoke of it as the Dark Ages because they thought there was an eclipse. There was a complete passing by of the great achievement of the Roman and Greek culture. And so they coined the term Middle Ages. And so they worked very fervently to reawaken this rebirth of the achievement of the Romans and Greeks. But it wasn't just a repetition. It was filtered through this medieval time. So what are the years then? Let's just be scholarly a little bit and think about the years that constitute the medieval world. And then I'd like to approach it a little more philosophically rather than just look at chronology. But let's just approach it chronologically first. So the term Middle Ages is a conventional name for the period in European history from the collapse of the Roman civilization, which took place generally in the 5th century AD, the total collapse of the Roman Empire, to the end of the 15th century. Those centuries were first called the Middle Ages, as I just told you, by these Renaissance humanists. Middle, in between themselves and the ancient world. Hence the adjective medieval or Middle Ages. So it constitutes the decay, the rise and the decay of Christendom. There have been many suggestions made for delimiting the period of the Middle Ages chronologically. So the exact dates are the result of what aspect is most strongly emphasized by different historians, intellectual historians. No exact dates can be fixed upon and justified on all grounds. But let's go over a few of these ways that they've tried to make beginning and ending dates for the Middle Ages. So these dates that intellectual historians come up with are in reality only signs which mark a process from one age to the next. So let's look at the various designations that some intellectual historians have thought about. Well, historians have suggested 4 dates which mark the beginning of the Middle Ages. The latest date is 732 AD. And this is the time when the Arabs reached the point of their farthest advance onto the European continent. The next latest date is 476 AD, when Romulus Augustulus was disposed in Rome by the general Odoacer, who was a German, and thus the Western Roman Empire came formally to an end. See, after Rome had conquered all these nations during their time of power, those nations came back with a vengeance, especially the German tribes. Next latest date was 375 AD, when the Germanic tribes broke the defense of the Roman Empire, invaded it, and settled permanently within the boundaries. Now, the earliest date suggested, and this is the one that makes the most sense to me, and the one that's most philosophically sound, I think, is 325 AD. That's when the Council of Nicaea was held. You probably all know about the Council of Nicaea, when the Emperor Constantine, on his deathbed, made a conversion to Christianity. And so the Roman Empire became the Holy Roman Empire. When that happens, the Middle Ages starts. That one makes the most sense to me because it fits nicely with the rise of Christendom. So the Council of Nicaea then marks the greatest triumph of the Christian Church, sealing the empire as the Holy Roman Empire. Okay. Now let's think about the dates that are commonly suggested as marking the end of the Middle Ages. 3 dates have been suggested by historians: 1517 AD, 1492 AD, and 1453 AD. The date 1517 has been suggested by some historians because it was in that year that Martin Luther attached his 95 Theses to the church door at Wittenberg, which marks the moment when the Roman Church, which had constituted the chief source of unity for the medieval Europe, lost its role. So that date has been, but you should know about that. That's the rise of Protestantism. The date 1492, that number should ring a bell, has been suggested on the grounds of the discovery of America. Western history, which had hitherto dealt with the old world, took on global aspects for the first time. And the year 1453 has been suggested because it was at that time that the Eastern Roman Empire, which survived the West, Christ sent Peter to the West and Paul to the East. Well, the Eastern Roman Empire then lasted 1,000 years longer. So so that's 1453. It was then that the Turks seized the last imperial city of Constantinople. So some historians use that. The date 1453 appears most appropriate to me as the mark of the end of the Middle Ages, on the basis of the same criterion used to establish the date of the beginning, the all-important nature of Christian teaching with regard to the Middle Ages. Because during that time, there came this renaissance, this rebirth of the great achievement of the Greeks and the Romans. But that rebirth filtered through all the developed spirituality and mysticism of the Middle Ages. So the Renaissance has that wonderful blend of paganism and Christianity. But let's talk about what an age is. What is an epoch? The word epoch means limits. An age is a limitation. In other words, it's a demarcating point. When something comes to an end, something else is born. So an age marks the beginning and the end of something. So what is this that came into being during the collapse of the Roman Empire? By the way, you should use all your knowledge, try to integrate all what you learned from different courses and put them together. You should know, after this 800 years of the Rome, Rome had like 7 kings, and then they had 400 years of this wonderful republic that our republic is founded on. And then it turned into imperial Rome for another like 300 and some years. And not all of it was horrible. It was, a great empire. But at the end, it was quite decadent. In fact, I can't think of a more decadent time in any nation that had reached such civilized levels as the end of the Roman period. Okay, so we have the Colosseums and you know rulers and emperors like Caligula and you know people like that ruling, and not just the people, but not just the rulers, but the people themselves demanding the circuses and so on. So we have this time of absolute decadence at the end. But that's not the whole characteristic of Rome, right? I mean, Rome has this long, great history. So that's the end. And then the rise of this medieval world, this zeitgeist. So what can we base it on? Well, being a philosopher and being a lover of metaphysics and ontology, it seems to me that an epoch is based on how beings show themselves, for the most part, to humans. And of course, every person sees something differently. All knowledge is perspectival. That doesn't mean every perspective is of equal worth either. I'm not speaking of relativism, I'm speaking of perspectivism. We all see everything from a particular perspective. But having said that, there's also a particular manner in which beings show themselves for the most part. You have to ask that word, for the most part. It's like talking about people, like the Italians. If you go to Italy, there's a particular kind of way that they share this view in common. If you go to Germany, it's very different. The people are different. The sense of humor is different. So there is some legitimacy to speak of a particular ethos, a particular manner of being of a people. And the same thing could be said about a time, about a particular epoch. So an epoch is a limitation. It marks the end of something and the rise of something else. So there's a beginning and an end. But this beginning and end is not like black and white. It's not like turning the lights on. It sort of drifts from one to the other. And so how can we characterize this epoch? Well, if we approach it metaphysically, which I like to do, then we could say, this is the way aletheia, truth, shows itself for people, for the most part. So, for example, we studied the pre-Socratics, and they spoke of physis. They were the physikoi, remember? They were they were concerned with physis. So what was physis? Well, we translated it as nature. But I was saying at that time, nature is probably not a good translation, because nature is an English translation of natura, which is a translation of physis. So getting back to the experience of physis, seen through the eyes and minds of the pre-Socratic, it's a completely different thing. It's not nature, but the emergence, self-emergence and development of things. Okay, so it's not so much a rose bush seen botanically as it is the blossoming of the rose, the maturing of the adolescent, of the child. Everything is, so a good translation of phusis might be self-emergence. And that's what characterized the archaic period. Things show themselves, for the most part, as phusis. So we can characterize that age that way. Now, when we move into the Middle Ages, phusis dissolves and transforms into creatures. Creatures. So what is a creature? A creature is something that comes before objects. Objects come later on. I mean, there are always objects. That sounds silly that, during the Middle Ages, there were no objects. But if you think of the word object, which in German is Gegenstand, which means standing against, it comes through in the English word too, object, to stand forth against. An object is something that comes forth and shows itself against a subject. It presupposes a dualism, a subject on one side and an object on the other. And so we look at light, let's say, coming through a stained glass window as objects, as photons. Photons. That's the scientific view of light. But there were no photons in the Middle Ages. There were photons, but people didn't think about photons. The light coming through the stained glass window is an emanation of divinity. It's a creature. So all things were either the creator or creatures. So you have this hierarchy. There's God at the top, or if you're a mystic, there's the God above God. Well, that sounds blasphemous, I know, but they thought they were being more deeply pious because they thought that God is not a being, but the source of all being. So the mystics thought of the God above God. That got a lot of them into trouble, even marked as heretics. But the common person and even the great theologians of the Middle Ages, not the mystics, but St. Augustine, St. Thomas Aquinas, St. Anselm, all the great theologians. There's God, the creator. He's omniscient, all-knowing, omnipotent, all-powerful, and omnipresent, everywhere present, and so on. So there's this hierarchy of beings. God is at the top, and then creatures come down from there. The angels are creatures. And even the angels have a hierarchy. There's like the top angels, and they're all emanations of divinity. And then beneath the angels, humans. And beneath the humans, the whole animal kingdom. And beneath the animal kingdom, the whole of the plant kingdom. And beneath the plant kingdom is the whole inorganic world. And beneath the inorganic world are the demons. And even the demons make a hierarchy. So there's this creator and creatures. This is the totality of beings. So things come forth as creatures. When things start showing themselves as creatures, the Middle Ages begins. So we can make these dates as historians do. And when Constantine converted to Christianity, that's a good date. And I like to start the ending of the Middle Ages with the rise of the Renaissance and some of the, like Pico della Mirandola, his famous oration on the dignity of man. That's a good ending point for the. But like I said before, these epochs don't like start and end like scenes of a theater. They blend into one another. But that's a more metaphysical approach to the notion of epoch. And then in modern times, things show themselves as objects. And then we move into contemporary times. Now things show themselves as standing reserve, objects standing there waiting to be used by man. And we see things through our technological gaze. And so these epochs, the technological age we live in, the modern age of the Enlightenment, or back to the medieval times, we see creatures. Before that, there were fuses. So fuses, creatures, objects, standing reserve, they mark the, the common way in which things show themselves. Now, among those things, everybody has their own perspective, but it's a shared view, a zeitgeist, a particular shared view of the world. So that's the Middle Ages. Everything is seen as, probably you should know also some basic things about the Middle Ages. You know, the only people who could read and write were the clergy and the aristocracy. So that's important. Um, Again, take everything you've learned from history and, you know, when you study medieval philosophy, put it back into that historical context. I think one of the main people to study, and this is a little transition now into medieval philosophy, is St. Augustine, or some people call him Augustine. I call it St. Augustine. Because what took place inside of St. Augustine, in his inner resources, that transformation that took place in him is sort of like the soul writ large, not Plato's soul writ large, but what took place inside of him took place in the world. Because St. Augustine's mother was a Christian. His father was a pagan. So he grew up in that tension, not that they were fighting about things. In fact, at the end of his life, toward the end, his father became Catholic. And I don't know about the details about his mother and father's relationship, but you know that does say something. And if you study St. Augustine's life and works, you see that he went through a conversion, and he went back and forth from Manichaeanism, which was a kind of pagan philosophy. Actually, it's a Persian philosophy, a dualistic philosophy of religion, where there's two powers constantly at odds and in struggle with one another. Two gods, in fact, the god of light and the god of darkness. It's called Manichaeanism. So he became a Manichaean for a long time. And we could take a look at his life. I have notes on this. I remember when I first started my teaching here a long time ago, 34 years ago, my first assignment, one of the courses I had to teach for my first semester here was medieval philosophy. So I taught St. Augustine, St. Thomas Aquinas, and some of the mystics. And I did a very careful lectures on the life and writings of St. Augustine. And I just reread them now right before my talk to you. And I decided not to tell you all these books that he wrote and talk about his life, because I just want to enter, given the time constraints, I just want to enter into some of St. Augustine's philosophy. But generally speaking, if you looked at the life of St. Augustine, how he went back and forth from Manichaeanism to finally Christianity, that transition that took place in his interior is the same transition that took place in the world. So you can view St. Augustine as a world historical individual. What's taking place inside of him is taking place in the world. And so if you could follow the transformation that's taking place inside of him, you're understanding the rise of the medieval world. Okay. But I'm not going to bog you down by that. I would like you to take a look at, in the readings, there's this little introductory thing about his life. Look at how prolific this man was. I mean, somebody could just spend the rest of their days studying and reading secondaries, just on St. Augustine's works. It's amazing. And they're all in Latin. But the three that are the most important are the Confessions, the City of God, and the Trinity, which is like 33 books long. But there's all these kind of, he leaves no stone unturned in every aspect of Catholic life. Okay, so I just wanted to give you a little introductory lecture on the rise of the medieval world, and from a metaphysical standpoint, and emphasize this idea that beings appear as creatures emanating from a creator. This is pre-object, pre-standing, pre-technology. And it's a feudal system. You know that too. So, like I said, everything you learn in history about the medieval world, bring this to bear on this. But I found that to be a little insight in that what took place inside of St. Augustine is taking place. So you have the end of the Roman achievement and the rise of the medieval world. And spirituality then takes on deep significance. But if you have time, I mean, listen to the music of the Middle Ages. And there's some wonderful reproductions of this music. Look at the art and the stained glass and the literature of this time. And it exudes, it expresses a particular world, which is quite fascinating. And even the fiction, the literature of the time, and the notion of chivalry, and all what went into the medieval world. But we're going to concentrate on St. Augustine and then St. Thomas Aquinas. These are the two giants. And this I should probably say in a preliminary way. St. Augustine is a Neoplatonist. So in between Plato and St. Augustine is Plotinus. I'm going to skip over Plotinus for this course, but he's important because he's a Neoplatonist and Augustine was very much influenced by him. And so Plato's philosophy then works through St. Augustine to reshape our understanding of the New Testament and the Old Testament. Okay, this is a Neoplatonic view of the Bible. That's St. Augustine. And the same thing took place, which is kind of neat actually that it took place because it's so tidy. With Aristotle, the same thing took place with St. Thomas Aquinas. In fact, Aquinas wrote a book on every one of Aristotle's major books. And he just took everything that was, he took the Aristotelian way. In fact, it's pretty hard to understand St. Thomas Aquinas without knowing Aristotle because they use what they call scholastic language. Like when he says the word accidents and attributes, you have to know that an accident is an attribute of a substance. And there's this talk, genus and species, the potential, actual, this language that St. Thomas Aquinas uses, it's all Aristotelian. It sounds like it contradicts a little bit of what I was saying earlier about the very nature of the Middle Ages, where there was an eclipse of the ancient Greek and Roman achievement. I had never thought about that until now. But perhaps when it came to Aristotle and Plato, this was an exception, at least with these great theologians. I think it's true what I just said, generally speaking, among the people, but when it came to the great thinkers like St. Augustine and St. Thomas Aquinas, they knew quite well about Plato and Aristotle. But it was Plato and Aristotle filtered through their understanding of the Bible. And then there's another tradition that I'd like to open you up to in the time limits we have in studying the Middle Ages, and that's Christian mysticism. And one of the great things about the Catholic tradition is that it contains these theologians who are mystics. And the word mystic doesn't mean anything like new agey, hocus pocus business. It's just a word that emphasizes a direct experience of divinity. And they all share something in common. But the big names in Christian mysticism are, well, the earliest one was St. Francis. Okay, I would consider him a mystic. Another one is St. John of the Cross. And the one I know the most about is Master Eckhart, who held the chair of theology after St. Thomas Aquinas, but was found guilty of heresy. A lot of the mystics pushed their piety to such an extent that it went beyond the limits and the tolerance of the Inquisition that was going on. Or one of the things about the Middle Ages is that everything serious was in Latin, and there were serious discussions about ideology. It was taken very seriously. If you said the wrong thing, it's like breaking a law or something. So there were controversies. So if you were a theologian, you held an important position, and you said certain things about the Bible that went beyond the tolerance of the times, you could be found guilty of heresy and executed. So it's a whole different time. So the more you involve yourself in studying history, historical novels, films that take place during the Middle Ages, reading history, and you see this world shaping. You get a sense of the world that this world is. And it's impossible to understand the philosophy unless you return the philosophy back to the world in which it emerges. Go back to that idea of the light coming through the stained glass window. It's one thing to see it as just light and photons. It's another thing to experience that light as an emanation of divinity, as a creature. Okay, that's just a little talk on the world of the Middle Ages, on the origin of the Middle Ages, and on what an epoch is. So now I'd like to move into a study of St. Augustine. Okay, thanks.